Hello, everyone. Fights with Friends. Seattle Mike here. I have an incredible guest today, and he has so many accolades. I've never had notes. Never had notes for an interview. Even when I did Randy Couture, I didn't have notes. But this guy has accomplished so much from the start of being the 78 California State High School champion. Correct me if I get anything incorrect. 82 world champion. 84 Olympic gold medalist.
85 world champion.
85 world champion. Okay, thank you. 85 to 87 world champion, right?
No, 85 world champion and 87 world champion.
And 87. Okay. 81 to 83 NCAA champion.
Right.
All right. 84 to 87 National Open Freestyle champion.
Right.
87 Pan Am Games champion.
Pan Am Games, right.
I mean, what a life you've lived, my friend. You are truly royalty in wrestling, in my opinion, and in MMA. You had your one match in the UFC. That was incredible. Yeah, against Gary Goodrich.
I'm Olympic champion too.
Yes, 84 Olympic champion. Yes. Gold medalist, 84.
UFC match was under no holds barred rules. This was before MMA rules were invented.
It's against Gary Goodrich.
Yeah. There's only two rules. No eye gouging, no biting. Everything else was legal. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's a lot of what we do on this channel. We do wrestling, we do MMA and stuff too. But I was just watching that match. I was rewatching UFC 9 the other day. It was the first UFC ever that wasn't a tournament. And
yes, right.
Yeah,
I didn't expect to compete until the day before. I wasn't even asked to compete until the day before.
So tell me what happened with that. One of your training partners, David Benito, was injured, broke his hand?
Yeah, I broke it. I was training with him for 2 weeks prior to the UFC 9. Actually, I was coaching BYU, and Pedro Sauer, who's my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor. He called me up and he said, Dave Benito's coming down to train for the UFC. Will you train with him? And I said, yeah. And he came down and I trained with him for 2 weeks. And the last day of our training, I slammed him on his hand, and his metacarpal rolled and broke. And I took him to the hospital, and they put a plate in. If they put a cast on, he couldn't fight, but they put a plate in so he could. And then I said, I'm going to go to Detroit with you to be your corner man because I think you're going to get in trouble with that hand. And which I did. And at the press conference, somebody ratted out Dave and said he's got a broken hand. So the doctor came over and looked at Dave's hand, and he saw it was broken. He said, I'm not going to let you fight. So I went over to the promoters and I said, what do you think about letting me take Dave's place? And this was when Bob Meyerowitz was the owner, not Dana White. And Meyerowitz, he said, and I quote, he said, oh, you're an Olympic champion. When you lose, it'll be even better. So I was like, I'm not gonna, what do you think I am, man? And so anyway, I said, well, give me, the night to think about it. I mean, this is all kind of sudden, I hadn't competed for the last 8 years in wrestling. And so they kept calling me every couple of hours after that to see if I made a decision yet. And they probably woke me up like 4 times that night. And
wow.
I was like, man, and so 10 a.m. they called me and they said, look, if you don't make a decision now, we're going to get somebody else. So I went down to the lobby. I brought Pedro with me, and I said, give me a second. I went over to a corner. I started to pray, and I had this really strong feeling, almost paranormal, that my brother, this was 4 months after my brother was murdered, and either my brother or Jesus Christ, or there was somebody like behind me while I was praying, telling me, you have to do this. So I got up, turned around, I told Pedro I'm going to do it. And we signed our contract, and I was in the octagon about 8 hours later.
Wow. Yeah, that was incredible because I believe you were 33 years old at the time. That's what they have on the video, anyways.
35, that's wrong.
Oh, they were incorrect. So you were 35. You were 8 years out of competition. So they had you at 203 pounds, and Gary Goodridge is 240 at the time. Is that about correct?
I weighed 200. Gary weighed 245.
So you were outweighed by 45 pounds against a UFC veteran. You hadn't competed in 8 years. Very impressive. You just went in there like you had just wrestled the day before. I mean, he could not stop you.
Well, I had been training, actually. You know, when I quit wrestling in 1988, and this is one thing I want everybody to know, I threw my last match in the 88 Olympics because I didn't feel it was moral to win an Olympic gold medal for that creep team, John DuPont, Team Foxcatcher. And I just, and 3 years later, you'll have to forgive my speech. I have a dental prosthetic in my mouth, and I'm getting all my teeth pulled and replaced with dental implants and stuff.
Oh, so no problem. I can understand you just fine, Mark.
Okay, so there was a guy on my team, my heavyweight, Mike Bolster, which is kind of funny because bolster means to boost, and he would like challenge me every day to fight with him, no holds barred, in the BYU wrestling room. So we'd put on some gloves, you know, the UFC gloves, and we'd take our shoes off, and we would fight, no holds barred.
Oh, wow.
And every day for like 3 months prior to the UFC. And it just so happened that, you know, this opportunity with Dave Bento came along after 3 months of me doing this with Mike. But Mike Bolster was a great heavyweight. He's a great, tough wrestler. And he gave me a lot of confidence because I knew Gary, by the way, is one of my best friends in the world now. And I mean, we talk all the time. But I knew because he didn't have a wrestling background, there was no way he could take me down. If he did, there's no way he could keep me down. And so Mike gave me incredible confidence that I could fight no holds barred. So it wasn't like I was totally out of it. Like I just came out of, you know, like sitting at home. I was training with the team. I was wrestling with the BYU wrestlers, and I was fighting with Mike, and I was doing jiu-jitsu. I had quit wrestling in 1988, and I became a jiu-jitsu student in 1991 after I had this match with Hickson Gracie in the BYU wrestling room.
Well, you had a match with Hickson Gracie. Let's back that up for a minute, though. I want to hear about that.
Okay, this is a very weird story. I'm sitting at my home. I'm the assistant coach at BYU. Alan Albright's the head coach. His son, by the way, is dying from COVID right now. I'm praying for him to pull through. Anyway, so I'm sitting in my house, minding my own business, and I get a phone call from this guy. His name is Steve Bishop. He was a student of Pedro Sauer. Pedro Sauer is a student of Hickson Gracie. When Pedro came to America, he was one of only 2 non-Gracie family member black belts. And it just so happened by coincidence that he landed or settled in Provo, Utah, of all places. And it was kind of because of this guy, Steve Bishop, who called me. He was a missionary in Brazil, and he met Pedro down there, and he talked him into coming to Provo and starting a jiu-jitsu club because he wanted to learn jiu-jitsu. So when the Gracies came, he came too, and he settled in Provo and started his own club. And one day I get a call from Steve, and he says, "Hey, Mark, I don't know this guy at all." He goes, "This Mark, Olympic wrestling champ?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "The greatest fighter in the greatest jiu-jitsu fighter in the world is in town. Do you want to fight him?" And he really pissed me off because I asked him, "Well, what are the rules?" And he tried to intimidate me. And he said, "There are no rules." I'm like, "What do you mean there's no rules? What are we going to commit a homicide?"
Yeah.
There's got to be some rules, right? So, but I wasn't going to let anybody punk me. I couldn't live with myself. So I said, "You tell him to meet me in the BYU wrestling room, like next week." And I had to go to the NCAA. So when I came back, we'll fight it out. I didn't know it was, and I couldn't focus or concentrate all week. I've never had anybody, confront me like this before. And I mean, I've been in fights, but I never had somebody call me up and schedule a fight.
Yeah.
That's what I thought it was going to be, a no holds barred to the death.
It's like a kung fu movie or something, huh?
Yeah, like Kumite or something. So the day comes along, I go to BYU wrestling room, I walk in, and everybody, and I could see Hickson is scooting on his butt, and he's trying to hook Alan Albright, my boss's ankles. And Albright's just pushing him away and pushing him away. And he's trying to scoot in with his butt, trying to pull him in. And as soon as I walk in the room, everybody stops moving. He stands up. He comes over to me, and I can see he's got cauliflower ears. So I'm like, holy crap, this dude's tough. So he goes, "Are you the guy?" I go, "Yeah, I'm the guy." "Are you the guy?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm the guy." And he goes, "What I do?" He's got this really thick Brazilian accent because he just came here. He goes, "What I do?" I'm not going to imitate it very well. It's like, "What I do is I punch, I kick, I headbutt, knee, elbow. But today we just do submission grappling until we tap out. One of us taps out." And I was like, thankful there wasn't going to be a homicide. But anyway, I took him down immediately, and I had him in a cradle for about 20 minutes. And I didn't know anything about jiu-jitsu or submission holds because all these moves that are in jiu-jitsu are against the rules in wrestling. Matter of fact, if you open up a wrestling rule book and you look at all the moves that are illegal, it's like a jiu-jitsu instruction manual. So I'm sitting. So I don't know really what to do now. I do know how to do a double wrist lock because I broke the Turk's arm in the Olympics with it. I did know to keep my chin down because I took some judo in Colorado Springs in 1 year when I was dating this girl. There was a judo player there, and I did know to keep my elbows in from judo too. So I take him down. I got him in a cradle for about 20 minutes, and I mean that's a long time to hold somebody in a
That's
cradle.
a very long time. Yeah.
It is, and finally my grip just gave out. And as soon as it gave out, he threw both of his legs over my head, and I let him do it because I didn't know what he was doing. I wanted to see what he was going to do. It was the weirdest thing ever. Well, what he was doing was going for a triangle, and he got it, and I had to tap out. And I thought, wow, that is really cool. Let's go again. So we went again for another 20 minutes, and I'm on top of him the entire time. But I didn't know any submission holds because I never practiced them. And he knows how to stay out of submission holds because that's all jiu-jitsu is, submission holds. So I'm thinking, I've been on top of this guy for 40 minutes, and I haven't been able to get him in one submission hold. Maybe I should let him get on top of me. So I let him reverse me, and I am a wrestler. So I've brainwashed myself to going belly down as soon as somebody, gets on top of you. So like, I go belly down, which was the worst thing I could have done. And he starts weaving in the rear naked. And pretty soon he has it. And I'm tapping out again. And after all this was over, he said something that just made me love him to death. He goes, "Mark, you're the toughest guy I've ever gone against." And I was like, "God bless you, sir." Anyway, I just loved him. And I thought, I got to learn what he knows. I became a huge Rickson Gracie fan right then and there. And then I thought, he's got a student that lives here with a club, Pedro Sauer. So I call up Pedro one day and I say, "Hey, can I be your student?" He's like, "Yeah, my friend, come on down." And so I became his student for 3 years. And, had it not been for him preparing me in jiu-jitsu like that, there's no way I would have had the guts to walk into the octagon. But after I learned I was so lucky that Pedro landed in Provo. I have a Gracie black belt in Provo, Utah. There's only they're only like in LA and Provo of all they just moved here. And so I was one of the very first people that got to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the United States. And so I knew, because I had watched Rickson Gracie fight. There's this big black dude in Brazil that he fought on that video, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in action. I forget, his name was Bobo or something, Zulu, I think. Anyway, he's much bigger than Rickson.
It's not Babalu, is it? Babalu Sobro?
I don't know his name.
Okay.
It was Zulu something. But anyway, watching Rickson go against that guy, I could just tell Rickson was going to win from the beginning. The way he was acting, he was so confident going in. And I just thought that these guys had the guts to figure out and perfect the most effective martial art, standalone martial art in the world. Nowadays, you look at the UFC, there is no standalone martial arts. Everybody's got jiu-jitsu training, wrestling training, Muay Thai training, boxing training. But as far as a standalone martial art, jiu-jitsu, it was the best. And so I modeled myself after Rickson. And matter of fact, after I competed in the UFC, some Japanese guys came up to me and they said in these real thick Japanese accents, I'm not going to imitate it, I'll probably get in trouble. But they go, "You remind me, Rickson Gracie." And I was like, "Oh, well, that makes sense," because that's what I was trying to model my style after. And anyway, that's the story.
Yeah, because you fought Goodridge for 12 minutes. This is, of course, for those people that don't know, that weren't following, there was no rounds at that time, but there was a 12-minute, there was an overtime. I know you gave Goodridge, he had such a bad cut on his eye, he couldn't continue, but, a lot of people watching, I'm sure people that don't even know MMA, they've seen, the footage where Gary Goodridge gets a guy in the crucifix, I think it was UFC 8, and just elbows him like crazy. And I'm thinking, I know Goodridge just got grappling.
You know who that guy is? That's Paul Herrera. That's one of Tank Abbott's best friends. And right before UFC 8, Tank and Paul came to BYU to train with me and my wrestling team.
Oh, really?
And then when he got caught in the crucifix, I was like, man, it's really that's probably the most brutal knockout in all of MMA. He was knocked out after the first elbow, but the referee didn't stop it because his head's still moving from the inertia.
Yeah, and the whole thing was still like 8 seconds. It was, as soon as I seen that, I was like, oh wow, this is the greatest sport ever.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think Paul broke his ocular bone. I think he started wearing glasses after that.
Oh man,
It's
yeah,
kind of bad for him.
yeah. That's the other part of it. It's like I see something really great like that, and then I see the other side of it, and oh, that was great, but then I feel bad, for the person that gets
See,
hurt.
back then, it wasn't like it is now. You couldn't have like uh, the money wasn't that good, and the 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 only way you got paid was if you win. So if you lost, not only did you not get paid, but you got a bunch of hospital bills to pay now
Oh, I
too.
didn't realize you didn't get anything.
Well, I did,
Yeah.
but most of the other guys didn't. I did because I was a last minute replacement, so I had them kind of at a negotiating advantage. But there's one Brazilian guy that fought in that thing for $5,000 to win, nothing to lose.
Wow. Yeah, that's not a lot of money. I'm sure a lot of people watching that was thinking, "Oh, these guys are making a ton of money." And
Well,
yeah,
the thing was, Bob Meyerowitz never went after the pay per view money. It wasn't until Dana White bought the UFC from him that he started getting these events on pay per view, and he changed the rule. I mean, when I was doing it, it was banned in 49 states.
yeah,
You, John McCain's, he's calling it human cockfighting, and it had a very negative image, you know. And matter of fact, that's the reason why the BYE president told me I couldn't keep competing was because he brought me into his office and he goes, Mark, it's not what we're about. You can't do that. And I was like, okay. And he goes, you can keep your job, but you can't fight. You can fight, but you can't keep your job.
oh
So
wow.
I had three kids, and they needed health insurance. So I kept my job, and that was the only fight I had.
So I was curious why you had never fought again. So when you answered it, that's because I was a bit surprised by that. I was like, you did so well.
I get that question asked a lot.
Yeah, I asked that. Well, I've met
Did
Rulon
it been
Gardner.
today? If the money was the way it is today, I'd have quit my job for sure.
Yeah, it's quite a bit better. They got the big ESPN and everything. It took a long time to build that, but yeah, I actually
Kind
spoke
of
to.
old.
Oh,
I was 35 years old. I mean, I hadn't competed for a long time, and that's pretty. I know Randy Couture kept competing and stuff, but I was pretty beat up. I had herniated discs and stuff.
yeah,
So I was at the end of my career anyway.
yeah.
I didn't
He
know.
took some time off though. I've talked to him. He's been on the show. He started very late in like his mid 30s after being in the military, and I don't believe he'd been wrestling for a while. I know he's on the Army boxing team, but he's just some. He's one of those outliers, I think, though, and I think you just
Yeah,
are or you aren't. To be able to compete at that age is just not
yeah.
very many people are ever going to do it. but
No,
but yeah, you share something with Rulon Gardner. Actually, I talked to Rulon Gardner too, and he had the one match. I believe it was in Pride, and I guess they offered him money at the time. Maybe it was a little later. They offered him. Well, he told me in person. I don't know how much he's repeated the story, but he told me they offered him $1 million to fight Fedor Emelianenko. And I said, "You didn't fight Fedor for $1 million?" This is what he told me. I'll tell you 100%. This is honest to God. He said, "I didn't want to hurt him." I said, "I would fight Fedor for $1 million right now." I said, "What were you thinking, Rulon?"
wait a minute. Rulon said I don't want to hurt him, and that's the reason
That's
they
what
turned
Rulon
down.
Gardner told me personally. My daughter was in his wrestling camp in Snohomish, Washington, and he said, "Well, I didn't want to hurt him." I,
Um,
I
I
don't know
love
if there was more
Rulon.
to the story or not. I'm
I don't
not.
know. Hey, you can't get inside people's minds,
Yeah.
and I love Rulon. Matter of fact, I recruited Rulon to wrestle for me at BYU because he's LDS like me.
What a great guy too. He's such a nice guy.
He is. He's a great guy.
Oh,
He's had a hard life. He had a lot of accidents. Crashed in a plane, froze his toes off in the snowmobile accident. All
oh, I
kinds of
know.
stuff.
Yeah, that was interesting. He's over there. He's over there in Utah too. Or he was over there. Was over there in Utah. I'm not sure if he still is.
Yeah, he was. I think he was coaching high school wrestling or something.
Okay, I'm actually my boss that I used to work with, the the owner's wife, his sister is Roland Gardner's wife, so
Okay.
so I kind of knew them a little bit, but I do want to go a little bit more to Gary Goodridge. One of the things that I always thought was the strangest thing, and I watched the Foxcatcher movie, and they show Gary Goodridge. They show the highlight, real quickly where he's elbowing Paul Herrera, and then when you go out to fight in your one UFC fight, they just make this guy up. It's this Russian guy out of nowhere. And I was like, what in the world is going on? This is a real guy. I know he fought Gary Goodridge, and I have no idea what they're talking about.
He took my story, which is in my book, Foxcatcher,
Yeah.
and then he twisted it into nothing but fiction. There's nothing true about that movie.
I was not a fan of that movie, actually. I love your story. I love the stories that goes along. One of the things was it was very slow for me. I would like to see a little more
It's
action.
boring. That is
It was. Yeah.
It's a terrible movie.
Yeah, and I watched I watched Team Foxcatcher that they did later, a little bit later on the Netflix. They did a Netflix documentary, and they had some real footage and some more things like
Not
that.
only is it tedious, it's slander. He slanders me in that movie. He portrays me in a way that's totally different than the way I really am. He changed history from the way it really was. It's just lies. The whole thing's lies. I thought about
I was very upset about the movie. Yeah, I watched it. I watched it with my wife, and I was yelling. I'm like, "That's not right. I know that's not right." And I didn't know at the time, but
and it doesn't make it any better. If he would have just followed my story, he would have had a great movie. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't give me the credit of creating this story out of my life. He just had to take the credit for himself. He's very selfish. This is the director I'm talking about, director Bennett Miller.
Okay, so you're listed as an executive producer. How
associate producer?
Associate producer. How involved in the movie were you?
Not much at all. I was on the set for less than a week out of 3 months of filming, and they tried to keep me away, and I know now why. Because they were trying to. Bennett Miller came out in the Washington Times and said, this is a quote, said, my intention from the beginning is to demean and disrespect Mark Schultz. Can you believe that?
Wow.
What a prick.
Oh, that is horrible.
This is a story I suffered for. I'm the one that wrote it. I lived the life. I wrote it. And this is what he does. He has why would anybody do that?
Yeah, I have no idea. There's some crazy people, that get up to the top and they do things, and it's like, why are they doing it? It's like, what would he even have to benefit from that? Yeah.
He shot himself in the foot is what he did. Because you see the movie, it's so boring. It lost $12 million.
Yeah, and it was. I know it was nominated for a lot of awards, but and some people can beat me up on this. Whatever, I see that it has a bunch of high ratings. I always tell my son when he go to watch a movie, I said, generally, if the critics don't like it, I'm not going to be able to make it through the movie because for some reason they like really slow, drawn out movies. And my wife was watching it, and she's watching this. How I got her to watch it was Channing Tatum. I said, "You want to watch a Channing Tatum movie?" And this is when I hadn't seen it, and she's like, "Well, of course I do." I didn't tell her anything of what it's about, and as he's playing you a little bit, he's like, she asked me, and she goes, he's not very talkative and not very articulate and stuff. And I said, that is not correct at all. I said, that's the opposite of Mark Schultz, because I'd listen to you speak. And I said, this is not an honest portrayal of him, from what I know whatsoever.
Well, he got that. I don't know how he came up with the characters that he did. The character's obviously not even close to the way I am, but there is a part of me that when, like, my life was divided in two halves every day, before practice and after practice. Before practice, it was like I felt like I'm going to the gallows because I knew I was going to push myself like so hard. I mean, I would push myself to the point where I was going to throw up like 4 or 5 times a day. Oh, wow. That was how I knew I got to my limit, was when my stomach went out on me. And so, but so I was very quiet before practice, but after practice, I went back to being like a comedian, like my dad. My dad was a professional comedian. I was always like make people laugh, and so but they never showed that side of me in the movie. But I do like the fact that it was very difficult to find someone to play me, and the only person I could get was People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive.
Well, I mean, they definitely complimented you there. His personality, you know what it reminded me of? Him playing you, and maybe it was kind of like the 80s haircut and the way he talked and stuff. Have you seen Rocky V where Tommy Morrison?
What?
Have you seen Rocky V with Tommy Morrison? Yeah, he's kind of got like that same haircut Tommy Morrison does, and Tommy Morrison was pretty ripped and stuff at the time, because I was like, who does this remind me of? And I was like, oh, it kind of reminded me of the character that Tommy Morrison, played in that movie. But towards the beginning, at least. But
yeah, I think the actors did a great job. I know they worked really hard to try to do the best job they could, because they respected the story, or my story, or my brother, the fact that he's dead, he's murdered, and they respected that, and they wanted to do right by that. But the director, Bennett Miller, he wanted to disrespect and demean me. He didn't want to disrespect and demean Dave because Dave's dead. But because I wouldn't lower my life rights price, that's what he did. He called me up one day and he goes, everybody's taking a pay cut. I need you to take a pay cut too. I'm like, okay, Steve Carell, Channing Tatum, and Mark Ruffalo are taking pay cuts. And because they're taking pay cuts, you want me to take one? Yeah. These guys are all multi-millionaires.
Yeah.
This is the only story. This is the only autobiography that I have.
Yeah.
And this is my only shot at making anything. And so I said, forget it. Well, actually, I didn't say forget it. I said, talk to my lawyer.
Yeah.
And so, they did, and they got into some fight or something. I don't know what happened. But ever since then, every day after that, it was just downhill. Everything was downhill. They tried to cut me out of participating in the film festivals. And Bennett Miller was so selfish, so greedy. He was just trying to take all the credit, all the ideas. I gave him every idea he had, and he tried to take credit for it. And I was happy letting him take credit for it until I read that Washington Times article.
Yeah, that's horrible. That's crazy that happened. I did have another question for you on Foxcatcher. A couple more, but they had the Team Foxcatcher documentary on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen that, but you weren't a part of that, I don't believe.
I'm not in it. Well, actually, I am in it for one very short scene, and where I went back there when they built that gym. That's another thing about the movie that's inaccurate. They try to portray me like there's this great facility built on the Foxcatcher Farms, and that's going to entice me to join their team and move there and all this. That didn't exist. When I went there, none of that existed. There was a crappy little wrestling room with a very short ceiling. That was a converted shooting range. Shooting ranges have to have low ceilings.
Yeah.
And so we work out in there just because it was the only place where a mat was, we didn't have to roll the mats up every day and then roll them down every day. Whereas that's what we had to do at Villanova. I made a huge mistake going to Villanova. Man, that was a big mistake. I should have joined the military, but I grew up in the Vietnam era. And, I had this kid living in the same house with me and my dad. And this guy went to Vietnam and came back completely screwed up, mentally screwed up on PTSD and everything else. And I was like, no way do I want that to happen. And plus the benefits and everything they were giving to soldiers back then, they weren't that great. It was hard. You saw Born Again on the 4th of July, and Tom Cruise can't even get a doctor to give him a pan to drain his bile. I mean, it really was bad for soldiers back then. It was an anti-military, culture back then. And so I didn't want anything to do with that. But nowadays, and I should have done this even though I grew up, but I didn't have anybody advising me. Yeah. So I should have joined the military, and that would have been my best option, because wrestlers wrestle in the military don't really go to the front line and see action. They're spending all their time training and wrestling for the Marines or Air Force. I probably would have joined the Marines anyway.
Oh, that's true. I didn't think about that. Yeah, they would have wanted you. They would have wanted you in top position all the time, because they want. If you're in the Army, they want to beat Navy and they want to beat everybody else. And yeah, you're right. I'm sure you would have done very well. But you have the Foxcatcher book that people can buy out there, Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
It's an editor's choice now. It was just elevated to an editor's choice.
All right. I will admit I have not read the book yet. I was late on the movie.
It's the #1 best-selling amateur wrestling book on Amazon.
Well, I definitely am planning on reading it now. I waited a long time to watch Foxcatcher, actually, because I listen to Joe Rogan a lot. I seen your post about you're going to get on Joe Rogan. I know you are. I can't wait for you.
You have any connection? Actually, I have sort of a connection with him through this new TV series, Fight Lore. Fight Lore?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In the UFC Fight Pass. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they just did an episode on me. So I thought maybe they could hook me up, because Joe really wanted me on the show back when the movie came out, but I had some health problems and I had staph infection. All kinds of things came along and kind of just got in the way, and I never made it. And now I'm ready to go, but it's been a long time, so I don't know if he's still interested. But I told him, tell Dana White, tell Joe, or if you see Joe, tell him I want to get on the show.
Well, he'd be crazy not to. Anybody watching this, tag Joe Rogan, tag Dana White, make sure and show him this interview. That's why when I seen that, I thought, well, I would never compare myself to Joe Rogan, but I do like to do kind of a slower interview, because I just like hanging out with people. I'm not like a reporter or something, I just like me and you are having a conversation, and people want to watch it later, they're going to watch it. But I mean, for me, this is the coolest thing in the world. I got to hang out with Mark Schultz, and, it's, one of the best things I could be doing with my time.
Yeah, podcasts are great, like an hour or 2 hour long, just two guys sitting down. It's not like, the Tonight Show interview where one guy's always talking and the other guy's always questioning, and there's no short time period, so there's all this pressure to be entertaining or funny or whatever.
Yeah, I listened to one interview. I was listening to an interview, a podcast that you were on, and the host seemed really nice. I'm not going to throw him under the bus and things, but it seemed like he's talking the whole time, and I was like, man, and then he'd go for a commercial break. You probably know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do. He's a good guy. But yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. That's fine. He's cool. Everybody that I've done like 5 podcasts in the last 2 months, and every host, one of them was just a kid.
Yeah.
And it was fun. Matter of fact, that was one of the funnest ones. but I really like doing podcasts just because of the format. So
Yeah, and it's great for me because yeah, I grew up a fan. You're talking about judo. Judo was my base, and I loved watching Bruce Lee movies and stuff. I'd been picked on as a kid, and I got into UFC, and it's like, well, now I like this YouTube thing. I got to meet Randy Couture. I got to meet you, of course, and Davie, and yeah, it's been a great experience for sure. So what are you doing now? Are you coaching in the day to day?
yeah, I have a seminar camp business where I go around the country doing seminars and camps and stuff. And I'm thinking of hunting child sex predators. Have you seen those videos?
I know To Catch a Predator, the guy Chris something. I can't think of his last name, but I watched some of that some.
Oh, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it because I may not do it. I just,
Yeah.
uh, but I'm having a lot of, well, I just had some medical procedures done. And they're sort of private. I can't really talk about this
Oh,
particular problem I have is just way too private to talk
okay.
about. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff I'm doing. I'm helping my son. He's building a house right now. So I'm helping him do that.
That is very cool. Very cool. Do you so what do you have a relationship still with if you don't mind me asking with Dave's widow and the kids? That would be your nieces and nephews, I guess.
I speak with Alexander once in a while.
Okay.
And I mean, I don't have any animosity or anything towards him. It's just we don't talk that much. I mean, me and Nancy we don't talk that much, but she's very involved with wrestling. I think she's a part owner in Rudis, and she owns the likeness and the name Dave Schultz. She has the right to profit off of that because she's the beneficiary of his estate. That's why my mom and dad never got anything from the DuPont murder trial because Nancy is the only beneficiary.
I did see, yeah, that was all I seen in a documentary. It said, she had sued and got an undisclosed settlement. So
yeah, I'm not going to disclose how much, but it's the largest wrongful death settlement in history.
Well, you guys all should have got it for what happened. It's absolutely,
I wish they would have been able to help my mom and dad a little more because they got nothing. They just lost their son.
Oh no, sorry to hear that.
But that's the way the law is.
Yeah, it's I'm really sorry to hear that. It's it's been
sorry. We're all fine.
Yeah. Yeah, you deal with things if you don't mind me asking. So I couldn't help but thinking when you went to the UFC, and this is 4 months after, you'd lost your brother when you fought Gary Goodridge. Do you just bury yourself in work? Was that a way of therapy for you? Was to get in there and say, hey, I'm going to train these guys. I just need to get my mind on something more positive and accomplish things?
No, because I didn't even know I was going to compete until the night before. I mean, I just
you were helping guys train.
I trained with my guys.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that I was doing a lot of Noel's bar training right before then. It's just a coincidence or a spiritual event or something. And it really was kind of a spiritual event because after the 88 Olympics, I threw my last match in the 88 Olympics.
Was that the gold medal match? I was going to ask you that.
Oh, it was a semifinal match.
Okay.
And I just felt it was immoral to win a gold medal for Team Foxcatcher. And it's so obvious I'm throwing it. I mean, I made it so obvious that I figured anybody could tell.
Yeah.
Because I didn't come out and say it back then, because back then it was considered kind of dishonorable, or it's kind of shameful to throw a match.
Yeah.
And so I didn't admit it for a long time, but I finally did admit it in the last couple of years. And Kenny Monday is a great friend of mine. You know, he's Olympic champion. He won the Olympics in '88, the year I threw that match. And he's sitting in the stands watching me. And he said to me, I knew something was going on. I didn't know what it was. But I thought, no way is that real. And then he said, I'm glad you finally came out and admitted that you threw that match. But, and so I was kind of miserable for 8 years, just because I went out a loser. And there's a book by Wayne Bachman. Do you know who Wayne Bachman is?
I don't.
He's a 16-time national wrestling champion.
Oh, wow.
He's a 2 or 3-time Olympic wrestling coach. And he was also a really good friend of mine and my neighbor. I bought a house from him when I moved to Colorado Springs. And he wrote a book called Wrestling On and Off the Mat. And in that book, he talks about how important it is to go out a winner. Well, I knew that because I knew the way I felt after I went out a loser in '88. I thought, man, it would have been so much better if I went out a winner, you know. So for about 8 years, I was pretty depressed and pretty, you know, and then the UFC comes along and just dropped in my lap, and I ended my career going out a winner in a much more brutal sport. And the whole purpose of me wrestling was not to win championships. It was to learn how to fight. I was miserable because I didn't have any confidence growing up as a kid. And I thought to myself one day, you know, if I could just beat up everybody in the world, I could be happy with myself. I could live with myself. I know a lot of people think that's kind of weird, but
I can relate. I can relate. People that know me can know I can relate very well.
Right. So going out a winner in the UFC was even better for me than going out a winner in the Olympics, because it showed me that I had the guts to step into a no-holds-barred cage fight. And actually, winning wasn't the victory. It was stepping in. It was proving to myself I had the guts to step in. That was the victory. Winning was just frosting, icing on the cake.
Well, there's a lot of crazy histories in the story of MMA and the story of UFC. That's one of the craziest. Not knowing you're going to fight the night before and then beating Gary Goodridge. I can see why they may have fight lore on it, and I didn't realize they'd released that. I'll make sure.
They haven't released it. They'll release it in January or February of 22.
Okay. So very good.
I'll be posting it on Twitter when it happens.
So if people are going to buy your book, is there a better way to buy it? I know some of the
Amazon.
Videos, Amazon, that's going to...
I mean, Barnes & Noble has physical books you can walk in and buy, but
I want you to get
Amazon's,
the biggest kickback. That's what I'm asking. You wrote the book. I want to see you get the money.
I'll get enough. Don't worry about that. No. I'd rather get the story out there than get the money.
Yeah. Well, you did the work. I know. I'm not saying that you need it, but you did the work. I think you deserve it. So.
It's funny. I wrote that book in like 2 weeks.
Really?
Yeah, I came home from the UFC. I had so much energy after coming back from the UFC, knowing I went out a winner in the most brutal form of hand-to-hand, man-to-man combat in a cage. I was like, man, nobody knows what I did with my life. I need to tell at least my kids. So I sat down at the computer and I just said, I was born this date, and then I went to school and I did this and did this and this. And in 2 weeks, I had gone all the way through UFC 9 and it was finished. It was 60 pages. Now I've edited it and re-edited it and stuff over the time period, but the bulk of the book was just written in 2 weeks. It just came out of me, just like.
Had you talked to anybody about writing a book, or did you just start writing and then went and found the publishers?
I just started writing. Didn't talk to anybody.
Very cool. Well, I think some of the things, some of the best things are very natural, and that's why I like podcasts, because just like Joe. I mean, like I said, Joe's, he's 10 times greater than me. I'm not trying to compare myself to Joe, but
now don't put yourself down.
But I don't, I don't edit things out. I think things happen for a reason. I think people want to see, full conversations and the natural pauses and everything else. It's just what I like.
And as much as there is a negative about one thing, there's an equal and opposite positive about it too. Sometimes it's hard to find, sometimes it's hard to see, but there's opposition in all things.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's a great quote. I think maybe to end on, where can people find you online? I know you're on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm MS Grappling on Facebook. I'm Mark Schultz on Twitter. I'm Olympic Champ 84 on Instagram. I'm Schultz BJJ on Snapchat. And I guess I probably shouldn't give out my phone number and email.
No, I don't have millions of viewers like Joe, but yeah, we'll probably keep that private. All right, everybody go and check out anything else, anything on YouTube or anything like that you're working on yet?
Oh, yeah. If you go on YouTube, you can see there's one match on there that somebody titled, I did not title it, somebody titled the most dramatic match in Olympic wrestling history. And then it shows my 30-second match against Reza Karabajak, where I got him at double wrist lock and snapped his elbow and pinned him. Reza Karabajak just died from COVID.
No, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That's horrible. We lost. We've lost, unfortunately, some good people. We lost Paul Varlins. I was friends with him. He was in UFC 7. Lost him this year. That's I hope we're getting to the end of those times, and I'm sure it'll make teaching. Sure, it'll make what you do easier once you get past all that too, and teaching and seminars and.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure. Everybody, like I said, go out and support. You're a living legend. In my mind, I always say, there's like 4 generations, and I don't like to compare generations, but I say Dan Gable, and then I say the Schultz brothers, Rulon Gardner, and then the new generation, Jordan Burroughs. So I think you're one of the Fantastic Four. We'll call you.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Thanks
always
again.
Want to be Reed, with the stretching arm.
Thank you. Take care, Mark. Everybody, thanks for.
Hey, Michael. Have a good night.
You too. Okay. Good night.